So reading was a big part of being a kid in the 90s. We had these scholastic book fairs, and you would get a catalog and you get to circle all of the books that you wanted based entirely on what the cover looked like. Was there a dragon on the cover? Sold. And middle school kids would read everything. Goosebumps, Fear Street, Lord of the Rings, that one series where the main character's name was a sound effect. But that all feels very far away now, and it's time to ask ourselves why. If you're new to this channel, hi, I'm Magdalen Rose. I make videos for the internet for some reason, and I think I figured out a path back to the world of reading. So if you're a former book fair kid turned smartphone addict, stick around. Smash the like button and subscribe. It seems like many of us have had a similar experience because I hear the same phrase over and over. I used to be a voracious reader. All of us used to be voracious readers. I don't know why we always use the word voracious, but it keeps coming up. But at some point, many of us stopped reading so voraciously or at all. In my case, I was never a great reader. I've always had the attention span of a pomegranate, so I liked comics a lot. But even that reading slowed when I got my first computer. Because I could read or I could play Age of Empires 2. It wasn't a fair fight. Those bombard towers weren't going to build themselves. Which is really unfortunate because reading isn't just a great hobby, it's also very good for the brain. The very act of learning to read rewires the brain. Reading increases mental focus, memory, reduces stress, and fiction has even been found to build empathy. That's a great thing to remember for your next date. Oh, you want to come back to my house? Well, who's the main character of the Dark Tower series? First, it's important to ask, why is it so hard now? I used to be able to read for hours and now I can't. Am I just so lazy now? Is my brain so withered with age? And yes, I mean, it's withered, but not with age. There's a lot of reasons why it's harder to sit down and read for so long as an adult. You have a lot more to think about. You have so many more responsibilities. Have you ever tried reading with a toddler around? Don't. But the stress of adulthood has always been a factor, and yet it seems it's more difficult to read now than in previous generations. There's a new factor at play. Now, of course, you're thinking, it's the internet, duh. Or not duh, if you weren't born in California in the 80s. For real? No cap? Skibbity toilet? This isn't the Wild West internet anymore, meaning most of us are spending our time on the same 10 to 20 websites. Those websites all have one key thing in common, and much like those bombard towers, it's not really a fair fight. Infinite scroll. Tristan Harris was a tech bro whose company Aperture was acquired by Google in 2011. After seeing some disturbing trends in Google's design methods, he wrote and delivered a slide deck manifesto called A Call to Minimize Distraction and Respect Users' Attention. It went viral within the company and led to Harris being named the company's design ethicist, which just seemed like a ploy from Google to placate him. Very nice, Tristan, we're going to put this right on the fridge. Harris eventually left the company, unable to continue what he considered an unethical practice. Later, in an article for Medium, he explains how companies like Facebook were deliberately getting people addicted to their product. Quote, "When we pull our phones out of our pocket, we're playing a slot machine to see what notifications we got. And that slot machine design is exactly why it's so effective. It's the same neurological hook that triggers a gambling addiction." He went on to insist this wasn't a coincidence, it was deliberate. News feeds are purposefully designed to auto-refill with reasons to keep you scrolling and purposefully eliminate any reason for you to pause, reconsider, or leave. So it's not just reaching for your phone that's the hook, it's also the infinite scroll function. That's why it's so hard to stop doom scrolling, even when you want to stop, even when it's actively making you unhappy. You just keep going. Every social media app has an infinite feed as a main feature. Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, Amazon, they all use this mechanism. Manipulating someone's emotions is one thing, but manipulating brain chemistry is just like Blade Runner level crazy. How are you even supposed to fight back? What with the one brain that they already dicked around with? I'm not one of those burned out gifted kids. It's all hands on deck just to calculate tips. I need every brain cell I've got. So this is what we're up against when we're trying to read. Company designed addiction. You're not more lazy or less smart than you were as a kid, so you can just let those criticisms go. But like I said, I've been able to find a way back to the world of books. I've read more this year than I have in the past decade, so here's how I did it. Start small, with reading whatever you can, and don't beat yourself up if what you're reading is simple. So graphic novels, books of poetry, short stories, all reading is good reading. And audiobooks count. I personally prefer to have a physical book, but people always do this thing. They always go like, oh yeah, I read that. Well, I listened to it on audiobook. There's research to back this up. The same processes are happening in the brain. Audiobooks count. The library. So this year I got all excited about this book and I almost bought it. I read articles about it. I read interviews with the author, but I found it at my local library and I'm so glad I did because it was terrible. It was so bad. I didn't even want to tell you the title because I'm afraid it'll hurt the author's feelings, but it was so bad. No big deal though. I just returned it. If you buy a book for $25 at Barnes & Noble and it sucks, that's really discouraging. So that's why the library is so important, because it allows you to try a book without any risk. Book guilt. Don't let feelings of guilt about what you should be reading get in the way of your quest to just read more in general. I say this not just as a reader, but as a writer. Some books just suck. Sometimes it just wasn't what you were expecting, or the writing style isn't your vibe. It's okay to get 20 pages into a book and just be like, no. The only exception being my book, which you should read all the way through. With nonfiction in particular, I find that there are some books that just don't have enough material to actually warrant being an entire book. It could have been a long blog post, but they disguise this fact by reiterating the same points over and over in different ways, chapter after chapter. It's more of an issue with self-help books, I find. Stephen King's On Writing was not like that, but Atomic Habits definitely was. And with these books, you can skim. I also want to take a moment to assure you that you are not the only person who has checked out a book, procrastinated for too long, and just returned it in defeat. It happens. Don't beat yourself up. Remember, you're still detangling your neurons from years of heavy scrolling. And that reminds me, I should warn you about the pull. Books don't create the same reward system chemically in your brain. The reward is a long-term investment. And when you finish a book, it's just such a great feeling, but it's slower. Pulling away from your digital feed is so hard because you are chemically withdrawing from the mechanism that's giving you a hit of serotonin on a constant drip. There's no waiting, so you have to retrain yourself to wait. The first few times will give you anxiety, and it is such a weird feeling because you can feel the pull on you. That's your brain screaming for the chemical reward it's used to getting. And the best thing to do is sit with that uncomfortable feeling and let it pass. The withdrawal time is different for everyone, but it does go away eventually. But there is a balance, right? Like, let yourself stop reading if it's becoming difficult. You want reading to be a pleasant experience and not something that you associate with guilt and stress. Book ego, something I know quite a bit about. So I have a somewhat embarrassing confession. As a youth, I desperately wanted to read Sherlock Holmes. Why? Because I wanted to be the sort of person who reads Sherlock Holmes. I wanted so bad to be the intellectual that everyone seemed to think that I was, presumably because I had glasses. This is the exact one that I read back then, and it's just so beautiful and fancy looking, and when I hold it, I feel like Evelyn from The Mummy. O'Connell. Now, I got lucky because it turns out that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is actually a really great writer, but I struggled through these books. I had to look up words I didn't know and historical things I had no idea about, but in the end, the stories were worth it, and I love Sherlock Holmes to this day. But it was foolish of me to force myself to read a book for the aesthetic of it. Likewise, don't discount a book just because it's not fancy or intellectual. I've been reading the Frog and Toad series to my son, and I think I'm enjoying it more than he is. A note on BookTube and Bookstagram and BookTok. It can be hard not to compare yourself to someone who seems to be blowing through about 10 books a month. And sure, maybe they did really read all those books. Maybe. But remember that content creators work on a schedule, and you have to post whether you finish the book or not. We've all been to Spark Notes, all right? I'm not accusing anyone specifically. I'm just saying, don't compare yourself. Book recommendations. Oh, I'm so excited now. If you like sci-fi, I highly recommend checking out some of the science fiction that came out of the 1970s. In the last few years, I discovered an author named Joan Vinge, and I love her work. She has a short in here called Eyes of Amber from 1977, and it just really hits. Basically, you can go to any used bookstore and look for a cover that looks like this style. Just pick it up. It's gonna be awesome. But if you want something a little weirder, I cannot recommend enough the work of Bora Chung. Oh my God. As of right now, she only has 2 books out, Cursed Bunny and Your Utopia. Cursed Bunny is a compilation of horror shorts, and your utopia is science fiction. Chung is an absurdist writer, which I did not know when I started it. I read Cursed Bunny not knowing anything about it and just was like, what? I own this book, but I can't show you because I've lent it to a friend who, now that I'm saying that, I realize I haven't heard from in a while. I'm sure that's fine. If you like manga, I highly recommend the Silver Spoon series. It's about a city kid who goes to what I assume is farm school. I'm not sure how it works in Japan, but it appears to be a technical school for learning how to be a farmer, but for like high school students. So it's like farm Hogwarts. Anyway, it was a fun read. My video series Tea with Mag sometimes includes library hauls, so you can find more of my recommendations there. And that's it. I hope this was helpful. I have a Patreon. Go check that out. Link is in the description. Let me know what you're reading or what you recommend other people read in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye.